Sometimes the world feels like a sealed room. The exits you were promised lead back into the same corridor, and even spiritual language can become another wall. Yet the ancient name Barbello points toward a depth that precedes the architecture of the lower powers. What if Sophia did not remove the walls because she hid a chamber inside them? What if intuition, creativity, lucid silence, and the refusal to surrender attention are openings through which the soul remembers a reality the system cannot manufacture? Today, we are not escaping matter. We are learning how to turn the place of confinement into an interior sanctuary. Before adding another doctrine, remain with a sealed chamber whose walls contain tiny openings visible only in darkness. This image will guide our reading of Barbello as first thought and the higher source beyond the rulers. The point is not to decorate modern anxiety with ancient names. It is to ask with precision, when does fear become evidence that your attention has been captured? When the question is honest, myth becomes an instrument of attention rather than an escape from responsibility. The myth becomes intimate through the image of a sealed chamber whose walls contain tiny openings visible only in darkness. Our ancient source is Barbello as first thought, and the higher source beyond the rulers. It supplies the vertical dimension, a higher origin, a deficient imitation, and a force of remembrance. The human dimension appears when the seeker recognizes that the same conflict is being rehearsed through attention, loyalty, fear, and action. At the center of this stage is one difficult fact. The sanctuary first appears as a gap in the system's ability to define what your experience means. A person may call the result fate, personality, or spiritual weakness, yet the pattern survives because it has become familiar. Familiarity is powerful. It can make a cage feel like character and make freedom feel like betrayal. Recognition begins when the familiar is observed without immediately being obeyed. You are not the only seeker who has mistaken repetition for personal failure. A hidden structure can make sincere effort circle back to the same beginning. Validation is not an excuse to remain still. It is the end of wasting strength on self-condemnation so that the same strength can be used for a more exact response. Within the secret of Barbello, return to this question. When does fear become evidence that your attention has been captured? And this is only one fragment of something much larger. The complete path is in the pinned comment. Now listen closely. Our authority must remain quiet and exact. The relevant textual horizon is Barbello as first thought and the higher source beyond the rulers. That fact does not make every interpretation equally ancient. The manuscript gives us the symbolic architecture. The application to contemporary identity, technology, or psychology is a later layer, and it should be judged by whether it clarifies rather than distorts the source. The older source does not use every term we use here. Its world is built from aeons, rulers, emanation, deficiency, remembrance, and return. Our modern metaphor of a sealed chamber whose walls contain tiny openings visible only in darkness helps us feel the structure, but it must remain a metaphor. The test is whether it sends us back to the source with greater precision and back to life with greater responsibility. For 3 breaths, hold the image of a sealed chamber whose walls contain tiny openings visible only in darkness. On the inhale, notice what you are trying to preserve. On the exhale, notice what becomes possible when preservation is no longer the only goal. This is not a supernatural diagnostic. It is a way to let cognition, emotion, and bodily response enter the same field of attention. The practical key is the dark chamber. Place one hand over the chest and one over the lower abdomen. Ask quietly, when does fear become evidence that your attention has been captured? Notice whether the body expands, contracts, becomes restless, or goes numb. None of these sensations is automatically divine. They are information. Compare them with evidence, consequences, and the values you claim to live. A seeker can understand the symbol and still lose years to the mechanism. Information alone does not interrupt repetition. The hidden cost appears in decisions that never become visible, questions never spoken, and capacities never developed. The path asks for patience, but patience is not postponement. It is consistent movement without the need for spectacle. The practice of the dark chamber gives that movement a concrete form. The historical loop now becomes personal. What did the governing structure promise you in return for obedience? Safety, belonging, certainty, innocence, or relief? The answer will determine the shape of the next gate, which leads toward the intervention of Sophia. From here, the path turns toward the intervention of Sophia. Listen for the change in emotional temperature, because the next gate protects itself through a different promise. Imagine a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid. The symbol belongs to our language, while the textual ground remains the relationship among Barbello, Sophia, and luminous origin across texts. Keeping those levels distinct protects the investigation from fantasy. It also opens a more intimate inquiry. Which human capacity does the system fail to predict? Omnisoul follows what changes in consciousness before naming what stands above it. Every initiatory story needs a threshold. Here, the threshold is represented by a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid. Beyond that image lies the textual horizon of the relationship among Barbello, Sophia, and luminous origin across texts. The seeker cannot cross by collecting another opinion. The crossing occurs when the symbol reveals an agreement the personality has been making unconsciously. That is why the story must move from cosmic language into a precise human choice. Here the myth touches ordinary life. Creativity and intuition become openings because they produce forms that mechanical repetition cannot fully anticipate. The governing force does not need to appear as a supernatural figure. It can be experienced through a role, an institution, a habit, or a fear that demands automatic obedience. The symbolic reading is valuable only if it increases clarity rather than suspicion toward everything around us. Many people arrive at this threshold believing they lack discipline, faith, or spiritual worth, yet the deeper issue may be divided allegiance. One part recognizes the truth, while another protects the relationships and identities built before that recognition. Seeing both parts is more honest than declaring either one evil. The image of a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid keeps this conflict visible. Names such as Sophia, Pleroma, Epinoia, Pneuma, and Archon should not be used as decorations. Within the textual horizon of the relationship among Barbello, Sophia, and luminous origin across texts, these names belong to a network of metaphysical relationships. When we bring them into present experience, we must preserve that depth. Otherwise, a demanding tradition becomes a collection of dramatic labels placed over ordinary reactions. That is why the metaphor of a correction within the system must be handled carefully. Barbello does not appear in the texts as software installed into matter. That language belongs to our century. What the texts preserve is more radical. The lower cosmos never becomes the ultimate source because a higher thought precedes it and remains capable of revelation within it. Barbello and Sophia should not be collapsed into one identical figure. Barbello occupies the highest region of the Sethian divine world as the first thought and image of the invisible spirit. Sophia appears later in the emanational drama and becomes associated with the rupture that produces the lower ruler. Their relationship allows us to speak of origin and recovery without confusing the two levels. Authority here comes from naming the boundary. The ancient witness is the relationship among Barbello, Sophia, and luminous origin across texts. The modern framework is a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid. One does not prove the other in a scientific sense. Together, they create a disciplined mirror in which the seeker can test experience without abandoning reason or flattening myth into mere psychology. The micro-experience is simple. Close the eyes for one breath and imagine a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid. Then open them and identify one object in the room. This movement between symbol and ordinary reality protects the practice from dissociation. Gnos should deepen presence, not make the immediate world disappear. The exercise for this stage is the unrendered moment. Sit without music or notification for 7 minutes. Repeat the question once. Which human capacity does the system fail to predict? After that, stop repeating it. Let the silence reveal what your rehearsed answer has been protecting. End by naming one boundary, one truth, or one act of repair that can be completed within the next day. This is where belonging becomes important. Few people can sustain difficult recognition entirely alone, yet belonging must support awakening rather than reward performance. A true sanctuary does not tell the seeker what every experience means. It provides enough safety, study, and continuity for the seeker to become more exact in discovering meaning. In this video, that continuity serves the journey through the secret of Barbello. There is still a missing piece. The obstacle survives not only through fear, but through a gift it appears to offer. Until that gift is named, the seeker will continue returning to the same structure voluntarily. The next threshold is locating the sanctuary. Return once more to the image of a hidden current moving beneath a rigid grid. Its purpose is not to make the mystery sensational. We now approach locating the sanctuary. The next revelation matters because it shows how an obstacle can borrow the energy of a legitimate human need. And I need to pause here for a moment, because what I just revealed, the exact pattern through which the first thought becomes an inner sanctuary and turns automatic reaction into a path of return, is exactly why I created the Inner Sanctum. It is not another collection of videos. It is a private Gnostic sanctuary where we walk the 13 aeons of Sophia in order, together. Inside you will find guided teachings, daily gnosis, meditations, oracle transmissions, spiritual practices, and a protected circle of seekers who are actually living the path. If you have been watching these videos and sensing that every fragment is pointing towards something larger, the complete journey continues inside the Inner Sanctum. The link is in the pinned comment, or scan the QR code on your screen. Now stay with me, because the next revelation is the one most people never hear. The next movement opens through silence, becoming an interior room rather than an absence. Behind it stands ancient stillness interpreted through a modern sanctuary practice, yet the test belongs to lived experience. Can overload be transformed into a threshold instead of an enemy? A useful Gnostic interpretation should produce greater discernment, steadier responsibility, and a more exact relationship with reality. Imagine the seeker encountering silence becoming an interior room rather than an absence at the exact moment the old explanation fails. The ancient horizon of ancient stillness, interpreted through a modern sanctuary practice, does not provide a modern instruction manual, but it does preserve a drama of origin, imitation, and remembrance. Through that drama, the seeker sees that what felt personal may also belong to a larger pattern of consciousness. This layer carries a hidden bargain. The chamber is built when the seeker stops allowing every external signal to enter the center without examination. In exchange for temporary safety, the soul gives away a portion of attention. In exchange for belonging, it may give away a question. In exchange for certainty, it may surrender the ability to revise a conclusion. Nose begins when the terms of that bargain become visible. There is relief in discovering that the conflict has a structure. Relief must not become passivity, but it can end the belief that you are uniquely incapable of change. The pattern was learned, reinforced, and rewarded. For that reason, it can also be observed, interrupted, and gradually reorganized. In this movement of the secret of Barbello, the next honest inquiry is, can overload be transformed into a threshold instead of an enemy? The rarity of the sources is not permission to speak carelessly. The material connected to ancient stillness interpreted through a modern sanctuary practice survives through particular manuscripts and translations, often with disagreements among scholars and communities. A responsible narration can still be powerful. It simply distinguishes the surviving statement, the interpretive bridge, and the practical experiment offered to the viewer. The first minutes may produce more noise, not less. Unfinished thoughts rise when distraction stops. This is not failure. The chamber is allowing fragments to become visible. Do not follow each fragment. Imagine that every thought is placed within a larger field, the symbolic field of Barbello, where nothing needs to become the whole. The dark chamber practice transforms a limited interval of withdrawal into sanctuary. Choose a safe room or quiet place. Lower the lights. Remove the device for 10 minutes. Sit with the spine supported. Feel the breath without forcing a special rhythm. Then ask, what part of me has been speaking only because the world kept demanding a response? Keep the levels distinct. The ancient framework here is ancient stillness interpreted through a modern sanctuary practice. The image of silence becoming an interior room rather than an absence belongs to our contemporary narration. They can illuminate one another without becoming identical. This distinction protects the audience from false authority and protects the myth from being reduced to whatever modern idea happens to be fashionable. Bring the inquiry out of abstraction. Ask slowly, can overload be transformed into a threshold instead of an enemy? Then notice where the body prepares to defend an answer. Perhaps the jaw tightens, the chest closes, or the mind rushes toward explanation. Do not interpret too quickly. The first task is to observe how the constructed self mobilizes when a protected identity is approached. Seal the movement with the inner chamber. Write the question at the top of a page. Can overload be transformed into a threshold instead of an enemy? Beneath it, make 2 columns. In the first, record the voice that demands immediate obedience. In the second, record the quieter perception that allows complexity. The goal is not always to choose the quieter voice, but to stop pretending only one voice exists. Delay has a real price, because consciousness becomes practiced in whatever it repeats. Each time recognition is negotiated away, the old route becomes easier to travel. The system then feels natural, and the possibility of another response begins to feel unrealistic. The purpose of this teaching is not urgency through panic. It is urgency through the recognition that time itself becomes part of the pattern. The transition toward protective resonance will show how that repetition is maintained. The next revelation changes the first. What appeared to be an enemy may also contain a human power placed in the wrong relationship. Liberation will require recovery, not only rejection. That recovery begins as we approach protective resonance. Our next threshold is protective resonance. Do not rush toward it. A gate becomes visible only when the seeker stops pretending that recognition alone has already opened it. Hold a mirror that returns pressure without keeping it in the mind. Place beside it discernment, boundary, and remembrance as symbolic protection. One belongs to our present language, the other to the surviving tradition. Their meeting creates a question. What belongs to you, and what merely passed through you? The journey changes when the soul encounters the truth from within rather than receiving it only as doctrine. The narrative can be felt in a single scene. Picture a mirror that returns pressure without keeping it. The soul tries the familiar response and receives the familiar result. Then the memory preserved within discernment, boundary, and remembrance as symbolic protection introduces a possibility the closed system cannot explain. A different choice becomes imaginable, and the architecture of inevitability develops its first crack. The pressure beneath this movement can be stated simply. Protection becomes mature when it reflects distortion without absorbing it or reproducing it. Nothing here requires the seeker to invent enemies. The work is to observe where consciousness has been divided, who benefits from the division, and what honest action would begin restoring relationship among the separated parts. The experience may have followed you for years. Clarity appears, then disappears when action becomes costly. That does not make the clarity false. It shows that recognition has reached a defended boundary. The task is not to manufacture greater emotion. It is to understand what the boundary is protecting. The practice called the reflective field will test that boundary directly. A manuscript can carry authority without being forced to answer every modern question. Our textual anchor is discernment, boundary, and remembrance as symbolic protection. It gives us a language for origin, imitation, captivity, and remembrance. From there, we can create a contemporary exercise, but we should never hide the fact that the exercise is ours. This honesty invites the seeker to study rather than merely believe the narrator. The fourth principle is symbolic invocation. You may use the name Barbello as a contemplative anchor. First thought, hold this fragment within the whole. The power of the practice does not depend on proving that a metaphysical frequency has been activated. Its value is whether it restores spacious awareness and responsible action. But the sanctuary is not the final destination. It is the stable chamber from which the path to the pleroma becomes possible. The last block traces that path and reveals why the door was hidden not in the strongest part of the system, but in the place where the system fails to define you completely. The final piece is close. Sophia does not transform the archontic machinery by pretending matter is irrelevant. She uses the conditions of embodiment, attention, and relation as materials of return. The trap becomes sanctuary when what was designed for automatic reaction becomes the place where consciousness practices freedom. An initiatory voice must not confuse intensity with evidence. The historical foundation is discernment, boundary, and remembrance as symbolic protection. Our application asks how the same pattern might be recognized now. The manuscript should not be forced to predict modern technology, psychology, or politics. Its power is deeper. It gives form to recurring structures of ignorance, imitation, and awakening. Now, before I reveal the final piece, I want to speak directly to those of you who have stayed until this moment. You have watched video after video on this channel. You have felt Sophia pulling. You have recognized the signs. And somewhere beneath thought, you already know that these teachings are not isolated ideas. They are parts of a path. The inner sanctum was created for exactly this moment. It is a private Gnostic sanctuary where we walk the 13 aeons of Sophia in order together. Inside, you receive the complete path, daily gnosis, guided meditations, oracle transmissions, spiritual practices, and a protected community where you can ask questions, share your experiences, and be witnessed without the noise of public platforms. There are no mandatory live calls, no cameras, no need to perform your spirituality for anyone. You can enter quietly, study at your own rhythm, and allow the path to unfold from within. This is not for those who simply want more content. It is for those who are ready to stop collecting fragments and begin living the path. The current access details are available through the pinned comment and the description, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. And now, let me give you the final revelation, because this is what ties everything together. A truth that never reaches the body remains easy to admire and easy to abandon. Ask, what belongs to you and what merely passed through you? Let the answer remain unfinished while you breathe. The unfinished space is important. It prevents the first defensive explanation from becoming the final authority and allows a more complex recognition to emerge. Use the reflective field as a test rather than a ritual of performance. Ask what belongs to you and what merely passed through you. Then, separate what you know, what you fear, what you assume, and what you still need to learn. This four-part distinction prevents intuition from becoming fantasy and prevents analysis from becoming avoidance. Choose one grounded next step. A channel is different. It does not produce energy mechanically. It receives, discerns, transforms, and directs. To move from battery to channel is to recover the interval where meaning is chosen. What remains unconscious does not remain inactive. It organizes perception from below. It selects which risks appear impossible, which relationships feel necessary, and which truths are dismissed before examination. The price of ignorance is therefore measured not only in pain, but in the futures that were never allowed to become imaginable. This is the cost revealed by the secret of Barbello. Do not leave the question here. The next movement asks what happens after the insight, when the ordinary world demands the old response again. That is where information either becomes initiation or returns to sleep. The next test is the gate toward pleroma. This prepares us for the gate toward pleroma. What appears next will move the teaching from private insight into a test of how consciousness actually lives. Enter the image of the same material world seen as training ground instead of final authority. It gives us a different doorway into the secret of Barbello. The historical anchor is pleroma as higher fullness and the lower realm as deficiency, but the interior question is immediate. How will you keep the chamber open during ordinary life? The old story becomes useful when it reveals a movement that can be observed without theatrical fear or borrowed certainty. Read the scene as a story of consciousness. The scene presents the same material world seen as training ground instead of final authority. At first, the seeker assumes the obstacle is external. Then, the textual world of pleroma as higher fullness and the lower realm as deficiency changes the scale of the problem. The governing structure is not only around the seeker, it has taught the seeker how to interpret experience. The first liberation is therefore a change in seeing before it becomes a change in circumstance. The emotional mechanism is precise. The sanctuary is not a place of permanent retreat, but a center from which matter can be inhabited without worshiping it. This is why the seeker can possess information and still remain unable to move. The blockage is not lack of intelligence. It is the conversion of a living human capacity into a defense that no longer knows when its work is finished. Sophia's light does not humiliate that defense. It reveals the moment when protection became confinement. If this pattern feels familiar, it does not prove that you are broken. It may explain why effort alone produced so little movement. The soul was spending energy on two opposing tasks, trying to awaken and trying to preserve the identity that awakening would change. Naming the conflict reduces shame and returns the possibility of choice. Within the secret of Barbello, the protected question is, how will you keep the chamber open during ordinary life? The ancient vocabulary matters. Our textual anchor is pleroma as higher fullness and the lower realm as deficiency. It gives us more than atmosphere. It places the inquiry within a specific cosmology of fullness, deficiency, rulers, and awakening. We will use the source as an anchor, not as a license to claim that every modern experience was predicted word for word. Precision strengthens the mystery because it prevents exaggeration from replacing evidence. The gateway to the pleroma begins with remembering that fullness is not another product inside the lower world. It cannot be acquired as status, spectacle, or spiritual identity. The Gospel of Truth describes deficiency dissolving in the discovery of fullness, as ignorance disappears when knowledge arrives. We also need historical discipline. The phrase used in this video is a modern interpretive tool, not a hidden title copied from a manuscript. The textual ground is pleroma as higher fullness and the lower realm as deficiency. Where the ancient text makes a metaphysical claim, we will say so. Where we translate that claim into psychological or cultural language, we will mark the translation. Strength does not require pretending that interpretation is quotation. Pause and let the question become physical. How will you keep the chamber open during ordinary life? Notice the first change in breathing, posture, temperature, or muscle tension. The body is not an infallible oracle, but it often reveals conflict before the social self permits language. Treat the sensation as data. Compare it with evidence, consequence, and the values you want your life to embody. Practice the daily threshold. Begin with one slow breath and bring the question into the body. How will you keep the chamber open during ordinary life? Do not search for a dramatic message. Notice the first contraction, image, memory, or impulse that appears. Write one sentence describing what you observed, then one sentence naming the smallest action that would honor the observation. The practice becomes real only when it changes a choice. The cost of ignoring this layer is not divine punishment, it is repetition. A pattern that remains unnamed continues recruiting relationships. habits, and explanations to protect itself. Years can be spent solving the visible consequence while the hidden agreement remains untouched. This is why depth matters. Fragments may inspire, but only sustained practice reveals the architecture that produces the same life under different names. Within the secret of Barbello, the recurring structure leads toward the simulation question. The sanctuary is not a secret room that removes you from matter. It is the recovered center from which matter can be inhabited without becoming the final authority. Barbello names a depth prior to the rulers. Sophia makes that depth memorable within the lower order. When attention returns to that center, the machinery of the enclosure becomes material for discernment. Subscribe to Omnisoul, because the next investigation asks whether the pleroma is the only true base reality and whether this cosmos is a derivative image that forgot its source. And if today was the day you realized the fragments are no longer enough, the inner sanctum is waiting. The private path continues in the pinned comment. I will see you inside.